Okay, we've got a double header here. I want to do one about Natufians, and I said to another uh, sub-Saharan that was trying to claim Egypt and everything, and I made fun of the fact that they've tried to say that they were the Greeks, they were the Vikings, they were the true Israelites and everything. He goes, "We was in Israel," and he sent me this link. So uh, this is this site. Let me go here. Nile Valley History, which is actually West African primitive descendants trying to claim again Eastern, North African, non Saharan, Caucasian, Egyptian lands. And let's just go with this. So he's got this cute little song in the background. Now, the Natufians are the oldest people and culture in the Levant area. Yes, that's true. I can't get all the letters in there, can I? So these are these heads, and I've shown you Jericho burials and these ancient Proto-Canaanite burials in videos 3 years ago, 4 years ago now. Hell, I did an older one than that, but it was just me talking. Then I interjected a bunch of pictures in the first one, and the second one was kind of, double. But so they always show you these, and they're made out of a light colored clay, like pottery, and it's people doing something with pottery, but the first thing they're doing is they're making a death mask. Now, it was noted later by some people in ancient antiquity, and it appears to relate to this people's behavior of putting a mask on them whenever they die, that they would leave the bodies out and let them still be picked by the birds and stuff. Some even Greeks said that they would let dogs yank the body around and everything, but then they would take the head away from the body and put this plaster and try to make somewhat of a face on it. But of course, they always put too long of a nose over it because you're putting an oversized onto it. And so it looks like that in some way, although the face would have already deteriorated by, badly, but you might be able to take one of these off, but we don't want to ruin it. But take one of these off and look at the inside of it and get a plaster cast, and you could get an idea of what they look like, at least at the point of decay. So it really doesn't matter pretty much. But there's been this old thing about pig man, and stuff, and I don't know if this harkens you to it, and not if you've ever seen pictures of some of the Sumerians, and it shows you these pig-faced people kind of, and bloated for a Sumerian, because most people don't draw anybody fat, and they were eating all this stuff and everything, and almost looks like it's a cannibalistic thing too, and everything. You wonder what that's about, and it's like some weird offshoot type deal. But these people here, he's trying to relate to being Negroid somehow. And what he tries to use is some pictures. And this, did you notice how this skull looks very different? It's very wide and not very far front to back. There's a lot of cranial forms, and craniometry is a study of different people, but there are different forms in them. And then there are people that have certain crap happen to them, king tut and boarding of heads. Not that they're growing those huge elongated heads, but somebody like this, the back of their head is going to be flat as hell, and it pushed out sideways whenever it grew and exaggerated the effect of even that form of cranium. Okay, but also something neat is they put those little conch shell type shells in their eyes to replace their eyes, and with plaster and stuff, as they made the mask on them. Now what's happened here is that basically the mask came off of this one, but a lot of the other plaster was left on in the inset of the eyes that you saw in the last one. And just by simply looking at this, you can tell it is a Caucasian because he has the thin nasal slit and not the Negroid type or anything. Also, just around the head forms and stuff. But they try to claim weird things, and anything that they can do to try to claim, pretty much anything other than West African primitives, they'll go after. And if there's ever a question on raciality, they seem to want to go for it hard. Now, what he starts to show in here is this is a DNA thing that had come out from the Library of Science and Medicine and everything, and he goes all the way down through it. And this is the abstract at first that and he's trying to read along with it, but apparently his voice is gone, and he just put the music over the top of it. Maybe he didn't speak good, I don't know what, but he's trying to do the bouncing ball effect. Basically, though, that they tell you whenever 24 craniofacial measurements of series of humans populations generate through the neighboring joining dendrograms. So in other words, they're all variations on a theme of these subsets of cranial forms that are all going to these people, but there's a couple of weird ones. That's one. And so they want to go, well, that one was a Negro, and it's like, no, stop. But they want to claim everything. Now they tell you it's ranging all the way from Scandinavia to Europe and through the Mediterranean to the Middle East, and show that they are closely related to each other. The Spries, and this is Brace, came out with this, by the way, and they want to grab a hold of anybody that says anything questionable, and oh my gosh. But the surprise is that the Neolithic peoples of Europe and their Bronze Age ancestors are not closely related to the modern inhabitants. Oh, well, I've shown you that and stuff, so like Brahma man isn't directly kin haplogroup wise to the Scythians and stuff. And you can see a slight cranial form difference too and everything, but they're still Caucasians, and it's variations on a theme, just like the three that went out the boat and all of that type of stuff. But although the prehistoric modern ties are somewhat more apparent in southern Europe. So he says, oh, okay, but it attaches more to southern Europeans and stuff. But it is further surprised that the Epipaleolithic Natufian of Israel area, the Levant, from whom the Neolithic realm was assumed to arise, has a clear link to sub-Saharan Africa. And he hops up and down whenever he gets to that point and acts freaky and does it, whoa, and it highlights it and stuff. But he's not saying that they're Negroid, but he says they have a clear link to that. Well, if you go deep into this thing, he's talking about these other skeletons that they found, like the Hofmeyr site and stuff, which shows Caucasians way down in the Cape at 40,000 BC, and Mectoids, and people they found in the Green Sahara, and Kifians, and stuff like that, and comparing along that line, and it's not even really sub-Sahara. Well, yeah, it's Sahara and ish, but anyhow, so, but Basques, those are Caucasians, and Canary Islanders are clearly associated with modern Europeans when cranionical varieties are plotted. Neither sample ties with Cro-Magnons, as was once suggested. And he goes crazy whenever he sees, oh, not that. Well, no, Cro-Magnon is a, man, I don't even want to have to go into that. Oh, big deal. He doesn't appear to be directly attacked to somebody that we say looks Cro-Magnon, like the Canary Islanders. Okay, yeah, but that's still Caucasians. Of course, go on. In fact, Cro-Magnon haplogroups are still extant today. Some of their genes are still around today directly. It's very modern human, 38,000 years ago, 36, depending on which one you're looking at. As we once suggested, the data treated here supported the idea that Neolithic moved out of Near East into the circum-Mediterranean areas in Europe by the process of demic diffusion, but that subsequently that the in situ residents of those areas derived from the late Pleistocene and inhabited both the agricultural life way and the people who had brought it. Now he's trying to use that last part to say, look, not even the fact that they say, well, it is an assumed clear link to sub-Saharan Africa, and then they're assuming that wouldn't be Khoisan or any Nilotic or anything, but that would all of a sudden be West African primitives. And that's not the way it works either, but it's an assumed connection to them for a few reasons, and one of the reasons is like date palms and stuff, and I'll get into that. This is probably going to go to a 2 because I feel like going. But so he's going to try to say this means black people all over Europe. See, not only were they in the Holy Land and they is Bibles. And it's like, no. And later he says they have to do with the Egyptians. And they go, yeah, the Caucasian Egyptians. What? No. Oh. Oh. Oh, it gets out of hand whenever they do this. They, so let me go through here. Here he is, just same thing. So now what's weird is here it says they show a somewhat distant link, the Nubians and the Nubian Bronze Age, who were so close to each other they were combined in subsequent analysis. And it's like, what? And yeah, there's the huge amount of admix to make a Nubian look the way the Nubian looks versus the other people. And of all of any of the Negroid skulls around in there, he compared it to those most. But that didn't mean that they were them. And the percentage he gave, which is in here somewhere, was 11 to 15%. On now, all he had was 3 adults and 2 kids, and one looked odd, and he's pointing it out about it. But this guy is throwing his, well, there's that one bulgy head, but you're not going to go, oh my God, they were all bulgy head people. And we're like, no, look at him from the side. He's flat back headed. Like Tut looks flat back and flat topped, and Caucasian and stuff. But so he goes on, let's see, where is that? Where is that 10 to 15, 11 to 15%? Is it here? No. So they make clear links also in the genetics and what makes the Niger-Congo people different, right? And in that one sample, they can see the difference between the two in the cranial verities. And I'm sure 7P7 could probably just tear this thing up with the way that she does it. But I'm showing you he's trying to equate the two, but they're not trying to say that in any way. But he is. The prehistoric recent Northeast African sample also has subsequent link to the Niger-Congo sample too. What? Yeah, the Caucasians there have a link to the Niger-Congo people too. Oh no, no. They're just telling you that in the genetics, they're finding the admix and these Negroids come from these people here, but that doesn't mean they was. Of course not. But they want to make it exactly the reverse of reality. Okay, there's one more thing I think I wanted to get in here. Still wanted to see that 11 to 15%. No, here it is. Okay, 11 to 15%. Right there. Accompanied by the Dominic diffusion of 11 to 15% of late Pleistocene, and sample was derived. And they talk about how Neolithic Bronze Age samples in Central and Northern Europe tied to a modern inhabitants, and then that's where it goes at war. But he isn't going to read this part of it at all. He doesn't read it at all, and then he stops and jumps down here again. And he said the interbreeding of incoming Neolithic people in situ foragers diluted the sub-Saharan traces that may have even come with the Neolithic spread, so that none discoverable element even remained. What is he saying? Well, the later samples don't show anything like it. It's just that one, so they're saying there might have been one that was admixed. Now, they did that also in the Badarian samples because they still had hair on them, and they found some that had kind of frizzed out woolly hair, but hell, women can frizz the hell out of their hair, and they still denoted it when they looked at it as Caucasian hair, but they jumped on that one too. Oh my God, at least some of them were admixed. No, the first inclination was, wow, look at all these people with straight and slightly curly hair, and then Some frizzy-headed people here. Is it Bantu knots? And no, it's not even like that at all. It's just looks like Richard Simmons, and not that bad, but it's different. It's a different form of coarsity of hair and stuff, and they're trying to find slight differences between Caucasians, and black people are trying to say, well, if anything's different than the other, then it's black. A lot of them are blonde and red-haired out of it too, and brown, blue, brunette. They don't want to, like, just like the Egyptians, they don't want to talk about that. So then he shows some pictures, and of course he picture a picture of a Caucasian, but it's done in bronze, and so it ended up turning black. But you can tell by even the cheek, it used to be covered with totally gold, and this is the Canaanite god El, or Baal, but this is El. I'm used to seeing this one. What other pictures does he got going? Warped picture of an Asiatic, and if you'll notice that the Asiatic Caucasian, and everybody talks about, see, there's pictures of Asiatics that are darker and lighter. Oh, well, then that was the Negroes. And it's like, no, Caucasians, even the Greeks, Mitanni, all these people use red ochre symbology and so on, and that's not a Negro. Negroes don't grow facial hair, really, at all, without having some form of admix. He tries to claim Persian off of that picture. Now I'm not going to read all this to y'all. This is where y'all where he tries to claim it, because it says excavated in Nubia. And clearly what this ends up saying is, look at all these Caucasians that used to be in Nubia before the Nubians even got there, like the Egyptians recorded themselves, for they all have connections to these ancient Caucasians in the Horn of Africa, just like it says actually in the definition of Caucasians, all in North Africa, all the way around the Mediterranean. Nothing stopping them, like a big Sahara or anything, and Negroids weren't a part of it. And the only Nilotic ones over there, these Nubians, aren't the only thing that ever lived in Nubia, for that's where the Egyptians got their gold, and then they came into that area, so they made them farm the gold in that area. And there's too many videos out that show you that the Egyptians weren't even allowed into Egypt by decrees over and over again, like Sensuret III, Simna Stele, and no. And so it's sad. But what they're showing here on it, what's neat, is they show that this technology goes across, and they reach to Amman, Jordan, an area, in the aid of superior technology, not with the aid of superior technology, Rose says, but with the climate and ecosystems favored the move. At the time, the Arabian Peninsula was also a moist savanna, teeming with game. The next territory next door suddenly turned green, and people from northeastern Africa moved in, says Royce. These people would have been moving into what they already knew, indicating that exactly word for word, it would have been Caucasians letting Caucasians and stuff. But he doesn't want to. He can't. He can't cognate. He's trying to cognate Negroid into every time they say Africa in the area of Nubia. That has to be Negroid, and that even doesn't cognate correctly. Let's just look at Nubians. So if I just look up Natufians and just look them up, it ends up picking up some videos, and it's got some ancient guys doing some video about them and showing mortars and pestles. And then there's one about this black guy, Navajo history, trying to take credit for it and everything. So we just click on Wikipedia, right? And we won't look at images just yet. We'll go back. So this Natufian culture is a late Epipaleolithic archaeological culture that existed from around 12,000 to 9,500 BC, or 1350 to 750 BC in the Levant. And so there's an overrunning, and there's an early and a late version. The culture was unusual that it supported a sedentary or semi-sedentary population even before the introduction of agriculture. Well, it actually looks like it's burgeoning on that situation, and it looks like it has to do with when it first comes down in, and bulls and everything else along, with cattle. It's the in between hunter gathering. They're kind of at the start not, but they're sedentary hunter gatherers that have enough going on in plethora that they can stay in situ. But then towards the end of it, they seem to start branching out a lot more and start going to a mixed hunter gatherer nomadic style slightly again, by the way. Now, evidence suggests deliberate cultivation of cereals, specifically rye, by the Natufian culture in Tel Abu Herrera, but the site of earliest evidence of agriculture in the world, by the way. The world's oldest evidence of bread making has been found in Shirabai at 14,500 years ago. And so it doesn't have anything to connect again to Negroid cultures. But then Jordan's northeastern desert is the area that it's talking about. In addition, the oldest known evidence of beer, dating to approximately 13,000 years before present, or 11,000 BC, was found at the Redekfet cave in Mount Carmel near Haifa in Israel. And I've showed you how a lot of people take credit for the very first wheel, the very first this, very first that is all being Sumeria. But there are connections of pieces of that come from different people, and they're ones that put all of that together. And whenever they put together the wheel with the axle, and oh boy, look at that thing go, right? And they were the first people to really get snap going, and simultaneously, or just after, early pre-dynastic Egypt started getting to the point that Sumer was close to, and then there was an interjection, and then they were very much close to it, but then Sumer fell after a great flood that happened. The people moved away. People from the area of Zagros Mountains and Susa moved in, and it never was quite the same, but it tried to hold its head up hard, and then the Akkadians took it over, and so on. But some of that influx, I firmly believe, along with a lot of people, came over into the Levant, just like the story of Abraham leaving from Ur, and came into the Egyptian lands, but not whenever they said they did, much, much earlier and before again. That's something else, though. Generally, though, Natufians exploited wild cereals, animals hunted, including gazelles. According to Christy Turner, there is an archaeological and physical anthropological evidence for a relationship between the modern Semitic-speaking populations of Levant and the Natufians. So they're saying it's not genetic connection, but it's all the others. So they're, it's a remnant of, and keep going on. Archaeogenetics have revealed derivation of later Neolithic, Bronze Age, and Levantines, primarily from Natufians, besides substantial admix from Chalcolithic Anatolians. Okay, so Proto-Hattians, if you will, are people from the Anatolian area. Dorothy Garrod, who's this, let's show a picture of her here. She coined the term Natufian based on her excavations at Shabka Cave, and it's near an area called Wadi an Natuf. And so, yeah, she held the position of Disney Professor of Archaeology at the University of Cambridge from 1938 to 1952. First woman to hold an Oxbridge stature like that. And well respected. Anyhow, it's in those Judean mountains and everything, with all the sacred cedars and stuff that we talk about a lot of times. And so, not to cut this out and go into it so much more, because I probably want to do one without having to do the debunk on it so much, or act so hyped about debunking, or even show the debunking literature whenever I show one actually about this Natufian culture. But there's ancient microliths. Neolithic starts coming in. They actually build things in a circular form, slightly sedentary into the ground. They found host holes and things along that nature. And radiocarbon dating places the Natufian culture at an epoch from the terminal Pleistocene to the very beginning of the Holocene, a time between 12,500 and 9,500 years ago. So that long ago. So we're talking about, these people at just after the last ice age. In fact, they say the period is commonly split into two subperiods. Early Natufian is 12,000 to 10,800 BC, pegging that exact date I've said in so many videos, goes with the cometary strike and the Dryas, and late Natufian from there on till 9,500 BC. Climatary change during that point makes them leave. And those ancient stories that come after that, that go into the Greeks, is the best well known of it, and Kronos and El and things like that in the earliest stories of it. The late Natufian mostly occurred in tandem with the Younger Dryas event. The Younger Dryas event is the indicator. Here it is showing it, where all of a sudden we were going through the last ice age, go past the Heinrich event and stuff, and then it warms back up, and we're just about where we are today, yet it goes pow, and it goes back down, and then it comes back up again later. And a lot has been made on what made this happen, right? And the Natufians come in and they run right over that. Okay? There's nothing good to say through here except for if I was going to do it, but they show that they hook up to the Fertile Crescent area and they have all of that. One interesting thing of note, though, because they are in the entire area that it shows here in the picture, they got dates from around this area and brought them around. This would be that Johnny Appleseed situation I was talking about, and how Phoenike actually has to do with date palms and the phoenix and rising again from the ashes, right? So Loring Brace, it talks about it right here, cross-analyzed cranionomic traits of Natufian specimens with those of various ancient modern groups in the Near East, Africa, and Europe, and Pleistocene Epipaleolithic. God, dog. Natufian sample was described as problematic. One sample was due to its small size, consisting of only 3 males and 1 female. Okay, so smaller than I even said, as well as the lack of comparative sample from the Natufians' putative descendants in the Neolithic Near East. Brace observed that the Natufian fossils lay between those of Niger-Congo speaking populations and other samples, which suggested he may point to a sub-Saharan influence in their constitution. Subsequent ancient DNA analysis of Natufian skeletal remains by Lizardus and others in 2016 found that the specimens instead were a mix of 50% basal Eurasian ancestral component, 50%, see genetics, well it'll do it down below, and 50% Western Eurasian unknown type hunter-gatherer. There's variations on hunter-gatherer. There's known type and unknown type. So, and this population was related to European Western hunter-gatherers. This is not black people in any way, and in fact it just threw that out way back in 2016, but they're still saying this stuff. Now, according to Bar Yosef and Belro Kovin, which, hey, look at those names, it seems that certain pre-adaptive traits developed already by the Kebaran and geometric Kebaran populations within the Mediterranean park forest played an important role in the emergence of the new socio-economic system known as the Natufian culture. So, no, it doesn't have anything to do with it. But what's wicked is they find that they build these teepees along with bigger structures that have wood structures around them, and they use fine stone hearths, and they start using mud brick at the edge of it, end of it too. In fact, some of the sites had so much pottery shard in it they were looking at, but they said it was just it was all broken up, extremely bad pottery shard, but they figured out that that had been where they had taken wood slats and put it all plastered onto it, and it's just like more plaster of clay, and it had just all cracked off like adobe versus regular pottery. But there was a whole bunch of it. But earlier, there are no traces of mud brick that were found, which became common in the following pre-pottery a Neolithic. And if you look here at that, they're showing you these Göbekli Tepe site that's up here, and really Göbekli Tepe site and the things that are found there. So these actually predate them somewhat and overlap and through the time of those people coming there. Now they tell you that, I'm sorry for jumping around, in Ain Mahala traces of post holes have been found, and identified villagers can cover over 1,000 square meters. Smaller settlements have been interpreted by some researchers as camps, so they would have been camps that they'd come to and nomadically hunt around, and even camp in between camps at fake little camps, and then come back to these at certain times and migrating with animals. And maybe whenever the animals got just slightly scarce, they'd move with them and the seasons, and so they had a cabin up in the woods and or a summer home and that type of situation. Traces of rebuilding all almost excavated settlements seem to point to a frequent relocation, indicating a temporary abandonment of the settlement. Settlements may have been estimated to house 100 to 150 people at a time, but there are three categories: small, medium, and large, ranging from 15 square meters to 1,000 square meters. There are no definite indications of storage facilities, but then again, in other pictures, they show that. One other thing to show here in art, along with the Venus statues that they found there, they actually found the oldest statue, which looks like these Caucasians making love. Adam and Eve type situation. So they talk about it being in the Negev desert and matching going around places and things that go along with it and circle around, but none of it has to do with Negroids, and very little, if any, culture is spilling back and forth from after this time, directly after this time, into North Africa, it seems, and around. It's pretty much the same, but the culture isn't changing over in any way, shape, or form, right? They note that they're living off of, they have obsidian, they're using shellfish, things along that line. There's a rich bone industry, harpoons, fish hooks. These people already had boats, right? But these old mortar and pestles like they have up here, and that's for grinding with. And they note that their teeth were a little ground up, and that's because of bad usage. My mom used to have one of those. It was made out of lava, but the inside was real smooth, even more than that. And she would only do guacamole. She wouldn't grind because she talked about that effect, that you'll get a lot of that in there. But they tell you here, according to one theory, it was a sudden change in climate, the Younger Dryas event, 10,800 to 9,500 BC, which inspired the development of agriculture. The Younger Dryas was a 1,000-year-long interruption in the higher temperature prevailing since the last glacial maximum, which produced a sudden drought in the Levant. This would have endangered wild cereals, which would no longer compete with dryland scrub, but upon which the population had become dependent to sustain a relatively large sedentary population. By artificially clearing scrub and planting seeds, and in barren areas replanting obtained from elsewhere, they began to practice agriculture. Now, however, they note this is a theory of the origin of agriculture and is controversial in the scientific community. There's a lot of different thoughts on that. One thought about it that I give rise to in some way too is that people were actually just collecting wild stuff and still nomadically moving around. Now, if one time they only took about half of it and they left the rest on the stalk and it died off the stalk and all the seeds fell off, come through the next spring and rains, and then they came back and then they went back into there, they would know, hey, we went up this ridge right here and that area is growing like hell. That's because of the seeds, duh. And so we could make this happen. Maybe what we'll start doing is we'll take half of it and then we'll take the other half and take the seeds and spread it over the whole thing. And now they've started occasional seasonal farming, and from occasional seasonal farming you get sedentariness, and especially whenever you bring in cattle and other situations that don't make it to where you have such a drought that at one time you leave there. So let's go over the genetics before I leave on this one, because I will do another one on Natufians. According to ancient DNA analysis conducted by Lazardus and others on Natufian skeletal remains from the present-day northern Israel, the Natufians carried the Y-DNA paternal haplogroups E1, B1, B2, and they show it here of its cluster, and at about 40%, or 2 out of 5 people of those, and CT, 2 out of 5 at 40%, so a mixture of the two, and E1B1 straightforward at about 20%. One Natufian individual was also found to belong to the group N1B, right? And that's strange somewhat, and to think that these people were already mixed to that point, they wouldn't be just from one haplogroup, but strange enough. And 2 others belong to the J2A2 mdDTNA haplogroup. In terms of autosomal DNA, these Natufians carried around 50% of the basal Eurasian, or BE, and 50% of Western Eurasian unknown hunter-gatherer groups components. However, they were slightly distinct from the northern Anatolian populations that contributed to the peopling of Europe, who had a higher Western hunter-gatherer inferred ancestry. So variations on a theme. Nothing more different than saying, look at French people, look at Italians. But they're all Caucasians. Hey, look at that London kid. But variations on a theme. Natufians were strong genetically differentiated from Neolithic Iranian farmers and from the Zagros Mountains, like the Sumerians, so variation on a theme, who were a basal mix of basal Eurasians up to 62% and an ancient North Eurasian, so more Proto-European and up in that corner over there. This might suggest that, and of course later, that same people, their haplogroup starts changing and evolving, and then they come over again, and whenever they do, that's what we do see later. We've talked about that recently, but so, people's haplogroups and deviations and things keep changing over time. It's one way we can show that there's evolution in genetics. Pretty damn easy, but you can see what we can do to horses, and what we've changed of horses and camels, what we've changed in chickens, what we've changed in all kinds of grains and things and stuff, and us ourselves have been able to change, especially by selectively choosing amongst these Adamic people that are of the Bible, if you will. This might suggest that different strains of basal Eurasians contributed to Natufians and Zagros farmers. Dun, dun, dun. As both Natufians and Zagros farmers descended from different populations of local hunter-gatherers. Mating between Natufians and Neolithic Levantines and Caucasus hunter-gatherers, Anatolian and Iranian farmers is believed to have decreased genetic variability among later populations in the Middle East. The scientists suggested that the Levantine early farmers may have spread southward into Africa, into East Africa. This is Egypt, bringing along Western Eurasian and basal Eurasian ancestry components separate from that which would have arrived later in North Africa, giving the difference between what people would say is the Libyans and stuff versus the actual ancient Egyptians. According to their results, the Natufians share no genetic affinity to present-day sub-Saharan Africans. This would be Negroids. However, the scientists state that they were unable to test for affinity in the Natufians to early North African populations using present-day North Africans as a reference because present-day North Africans owe most of their ancestry to back migration from Eurasia. And that population has Negroid admix so much into it that they can't infer correctly off of that. It's that simple, but Eurasia again. Ancient DNA analysis has confirmed ancestral ties between the Natufian culture bearers and the makers of the Epopaleolithic Ibo-Morasian. So this is way over in Spain and stuff, and the connector of what we think of as Berbers today and stuff, or the Amazigh, and were the Phoenicians and Carthaginians and all of Caucasian North Africa at the time. And the culture of the Maghreb, we call it, the pre-pottery Neolithic culture of the Levant, the early Neolithic Ifri and Musa culture of the Maghreb, the Savannah pastoral Neolithic culture of East Africa, and the late Neolithic Kif el-Berud culture of the Maghreb, and the ancient Egyptian culture of the Nile Valley, with fossils associated with these early cultures all sharing a common genomic component. What's that common genomic component? Early European hunter-gatherers. That's amazing. They had a little spiff on what they might have spoke too, but it ends up being that they agreed probably on Proto-Afro-Asiatic language, so what came before the Phoenician languages and things like that. And of course Afro, they hear that, no boy, no, Africa is named after a white person by white people. All of North Africa, look at Herodotus' map and it's cut off. They don't even know sub-Saharan Africa exists. It's the abyss of the desert. But what is important is these are all Caucasians. The Egyptians were Caucasians. These early Natufians in that area, of course, are Caucasians. Where are we going to find early Negroids then? You're going to find Nilotics go away here at about earliest Nilotic Proto-Negroid, not even regular Negroid, but Proto-Negroid is 9,100 BC. And from any time before that, if we do find any, which we have not found one older, it's going to be over in West Africa and in the Ivory Coast, for there are too many other sites that are showing Caucasians all over the place and stuff. So, yeah. And they talk about the mix of people that are in the Egypt and the Horn of Africa and Sudan having this effect, but then it's Caucasian, 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 and then Caucasians in the Sudan area, and that some admix people have a little of it, but it's from that. So nothing is from Negroids, and they keep trying to say, oh, everything's from us out of Africa, and it's like, no. A lot of the cultures and a lot of things happen in Africa, and a lot of them don't have to do with Negroids at all. In fact, they're not part of the Bible. They aren't part of Egypt. Anything that says North Africa in it, why don't they just keep talking about what happened in West Africa, even though they aren't even related to each other and their tribes don't get along? Because that would be a little bit more correct. So linguistics and everybody, after they went through it, and Arid, like military, believes Afro-Asiatic may already have been in existence in the Natufian period, and so that would associate ancient Natufians only with the Near Eastern, pre-Proto-Semitic branch of the Afro-Asiatic. Again, I'm even going to pull it away from North Africa, because that